Good evening. If I may, let's pause for a moment in silence and reflection, and please keep in mind our family on Greensboro Street, the Brocks that are going through this terrible time of a loved one missing, and also keep in mind all of those, our police department and all the other departments and people that are helping in solving this mystery. And let's pray for the best results possible as we go forth. So let's pause for just a moment. All right, thank you very, very much. We'll officially call this regular monthly meeting of the Town of Holden Beach to order. Welcome all of you, and remind those of you that may not be accustomed to the information on the table in the back of the room. In this corner, we'll have an agenda and other documents for your review and taking with you if you so choose. Again, thank you for being here. And if you would, let's stand and pledge allegiance to the flag to my right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're going to consider approving the agenda as presented. Is there any motions?
So moved.
I have a second anywhere?
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous, Madam Clerk. Number 5 on the agenda, as just approved, is a consideration of minutes for February 5, 15, 19, and 19. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
As a group?
Either way you want to make the motion.
As a group,
I'm-
so
I'm-
moved.
Okay, as a group, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. It's unanimous. Again, Madam Clerk. It's my clear understanding that we have no one that signed up to speak in the public comments on agenda items. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
Correct.
All right, we'll move on to number 7, and town,
There was a hand in there.
That was not correct, actually, as far as public comments. I didn't see a sign-up sheet right there, if that's possible.
That's for agenda items. I believe what you guys are speaking about is public comments on regular items, which is at the end.
I hope you're here to tell us how happy you are that the boat ramp's open. But anyway, following along here, the Assistant Town Manager Ferguson.
Good evening, everyone. The chamber contacted us. Each year they run a kids expo somewhere in the county. On some of their special events, they are alternating locations, and they are interested in Holden Beach this year for their kids expo, which will be for kids age 7 to 17. The proposed date is Saturday, August 17th. I have Robin from the chamber here to give you some additional information, but the reason it's before you is because much like the festival, since the kids would be doing vending, it would require you to make a change to the ordinance so that they could have an exception for that day like the festivals. So if you guys have specific questions, I'll let her describe the event.
Thank you for letting me be here tonight. Last year was the first year that we did this event. It's an opportunity for young kids to share their entrepreneurial spirit. So this event is for ages 7, actually to 17 or 18, as long as they're still in high school. They market, they create, market, sell, brand product or service, and then they sell it in a 3-hour pop-up shop. We generally have that outdoors, and we'd like to have it in Holden Beach this year. These kids do workshops and other activities leading up so that they can prepare themselves. Adults are not, their parents or guardians are not allowed to help them in their booths, so they're really working on their math skills, creative thinking, communication skills, understanding a good handshake, looking somebody in the eye when they're speaking to them, making change for their customers, and being able to answer questions about their products as well. So it's a great exercise for them in understanding sales, and working on a lot of things that they'll need in both their personal and professional development. And we'd love to host it in Holden Beach this year. So do you have any questions for me about the event?
Any questions?
I have one.
Yes.
Are these Brunswick County kids?
Yes, it's open to Brunswick County residents.
Is there any cost to the town?
No.
Okay.
About how many booths did you have last year?
Last year, we had 33 kids with 25 booths. We're expecting maybe closer to 50 this year.
Do we have to provide any special services such as police or fire or anything like that?
I communicated with the police department to make sure that they were okay with the event as far as, going through the event to look for safety and just things they normally do. They won't need to have additional officers, but they do feel like that it can be accommodated with the things that are going on with the bridge.
And this is a nonprofit?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's through the chamber, and
Right,
there's
right.
no money that the chamber makes off of this. We do take sponsorships. Primarily, that's to help us pay for any materials that we need. We also,
Expenses.
we don't charge the kids any fees, so if they need help with supplies to get their business up and running, we don't want cost to become a factor for them. We help them with tents or tables or anything else that they need for setup. And none of the sponsors are allowed to vend. We use signage at the event, so it would strictly be the kids that would be vending.
Mr. Evans, do you have to inspect these?
No.
Okay. Any more questions?
If I could make just one statement that the town is a member of the Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
Anything else?
This was just a sort of an observation, starting at 10 o'clock. I know we're not in high season, but it's still a big time for all the services to be coming over the island, so the traffic at the beginning might be a little bit dicey, which I'm sure you know.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. So the ask is an approval for this,
Yes, sir.
Christie? Okay. I move we approve this.
A second.
Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. It's unanimous. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Number 8 on the agenda, police report. Obviously, Detective Jeremy Dixon is exceptionally busy. He will not be here tonight, but we do have the reports in your packet. Anything to add to that, Mr. Hewitt? No? Number 9 on the agenda, Public Works Director, Mr. Clemens.
Good evening. At our last board meeting, I announced to you that I thought that we'd be complete with pump station floor upgrades by this meeting, but unfortunately, had a few issues with the contractors that weren't able to make that happen. Nothing major. One of the parts and pieces that actually we need for completion was the louvers that were custom built, which they arrived on site yesterday, so they should be installed within the next few days. We actually met on site today with the engineer and all the contractors involved with the project to try to come up with a punch list of things that we had to have before we could be finished with it. And there's nothing really major on there that I say is gonna cause a major issue. There's just a few small details right there, 4 or 5 things about the delivered, louvers delivered. A little bit of problems with the HVAC, just nothing major, just a drain issue. Just a few loose odds and ends on the electrical, and some base plate covers and things like that. But I would like to add that we still have to have a final inspection from the building inspector, which has not been called in because it hasn't been complete with the project, but spent a pretty good bit of time there today, and I think maybe that punch list is gonna be pretty small, or nothing that I see that would cause a major issue to say we had a disaster. But I would like to say that the system is fully operational now, which I said that the last time, but big part of that is if everything works in July as it does now, we'll be in good shape. But, you know, that would be one of concerns, one concern is like air conditioning in the building, I'm hoping it's adequate, but we really won't know till we're running those pumps and stuff in the summer and we're up full song, but even, you know, that's fairly minor, something that can be took care of pretty easy. Other than that, that's really about all I got for report on that. If you got any questions I can answer, I'll let me answer them.
I have one question. First of all, Joe and I, Chris was nice enough to give us a tour of the pump number 4, and very impressive, very, very impressive. Quality job. Couldn't say more about it. But are we holding some funds
Absolutely.
to final payment?
Absolutely.
So we have the, okay.
So we get a CO, we get the documentation in our hand. One of the details that we've got to have operational manuals. It's got to have a list of all the as-bills, everything that's changed on the plans. They've got to have an allocation certificate and a few things like that. Until we get that, whether it's functional or not, he won't get no money. I mean, it's.
Okay, okay, perfect,
it's gotta
perfect.
be right.
Because, you know, it's always that last few things, right? Everybody's been through that.
Yes,
So
sir.
you want to have some leverage
Yeah,
on that.
yeah, usually
Okay,
if you don't get paid, that's pretty good leverage.
that's very good leverage, yep, okay.
And that is about it.
All right, nothing else? You want to continue on the next item on the agenda?
If you like, I sure will.
Have at it.
Save me a trip back to sleep there.
Yes, sir. Number 10.
Yeah, as you know, we advertise for bids for, qualified engineers for the engineering services for pump station 3 upgrades. We can budget this year and proceed, you know, and make the same improvements on pump station 3 that we did before. And we have 3 responsive bidders, one of them was McGill and Associates, one of them was East Coast Engineering, and the other one was, Green Engineering. I know, some people may be skeptical about selecting an engineer at this time, because we're not complete with that, but we're complete with 4. But just from my perspective and opinion, I don't see anything major that's gonna come up that would keep us from, that would that would change our decision on whoever that we choose. It's pretty, you know, tight schedule, and the quicker we can select a firm, the quicker we get started on getting some plans and get something going for next year. So that being said, the ball's sort of in y'all's court about who you choose for the next one, but, you know, that was just my opinion I threw out there.
Do you have a recommendation?
Well, they all qualify, you know, look at past experience. And I've got one that just done one, you know. I don't know.
Are you completely happy with Green's performance over the last year? Are you as happy as you were when you hired them?
Can't say that I'm not.
Okay, that's
It's a
enough.
pretty complicated
That's all.
project there, and there's a lot of things that could have happened, you know, we could have some disasters. You know, I couldn't sit here and say that everything was peachy or cream, but we dodged some major bullets, you know, to keep everything running while we were doing the station. I mean, that was a biggie.
Well, one thing I noticed is, again, and I'm sure part of it is their experience, Green is saying that they'll finish up in March of next year, similar to this year's project. And, sorry, we're saying that Green has said they'll finish up in March of next year, similar to this year's project deadline. And East Coast Engineering has, you know, pushed it back into April, which I would expect somebody starting not as up to date on exactly how to do it, and that 1 month is a pretty important time slippage. So there is that one difference. I'm, as you say, they're all qualified. After reading everything, I actually was as impressed with Leo's team reading this as I was last year.
Yeah. McGill also is
Yeah.
April.
I know, yeah,
As-
no,
as
I know,
well.
I know.
Both.
I've read them all.
Yep.
I read them all.
Chris, you see a good deal of learning that the Greens firm learned this year that would carry forward for them? They're already bunched up, they already know it all already?
They probably learned a whole lot, if you got a notepad. I mean, like some of the parts and pieces, especially the older pieces, and you had to locate places to get them, and then what have you, and we went through that learning curve on that, seeing what kind of time frame, and how that can relate to the project. That was a big holdup, I'm amazed that we've made it as far as we have, because our original deadline was like March the 1st. We've been operational since it's like the electrical guy that done the wiring, you know, he's a big part of being able to make that happen, because I was hearing tales that somebody was thinking we're gonna have to be shut down for 6, 8 hours or whatever. We were actually able to run both sides of the system and not have any downtime at all.
Well, speaking of learning, McGill has a pretty interesting proposal as far as changing the design, right? To eliminate the existing wet well.
That's not.
I mean, not McGill, Green. So,
Possibility, it was a possibility to investigate the possibility of doing that, and what it would cost to do it.
Yeah.
So if you look at the pros and cons, and figure out that's the direction we need to go.
yeah, that's,
And in my world, if it could be done, it would be money well spent.
yeah.
I'll tell you, being down there today with you, Chris, and taking a look at the wet well that's there, right at 4, and we could do anything to eliminate that, that would be really a major step in the right direction. And when I got home, I went back into the document and took a look at the schematic, the simplistic block drawing on page 9. And, I mean, it really jumps off the page at me, and it makes a lot of sense, you know, to do that. Because from station number 3, the material goes to number 4, and then from number 4, then it goes back to Seagull Street to be pumped off the island. And if we could kind of do that all in one, when it comes out of 3, when it comes to Seagull Street, just make a connection there. And I say it's not just, but it's a matter of piping, pump sizes, and everything else. The question that comes off the top of my head real quick is that if you got material coming out of 3 and you got material coming out of 4 at the same time, you know, so that would be a question for Mr. Green.
That's the question that's in my mind. We know it travels the path of least resistance, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's all pipe sizing, it's pumps, I would imagine, and that, but I was intrigued with that. I really was. And also, I'd like to say thank you for your communication during this whole process, because you've had a few uphill snags, whether it was the steel, whether it was the roof, whether it was the outside material that's going to be put up soon, that's laying out there now. You've done a good job in communicating with us, and I thank you for that.
And I would like to add on the engineer's behalf, when you said, did he learn anything? You probably learned who not to deal with that causes snag up.
It's part of the process.
Maybe I shouldn't have said that.
I think the other thing that's interesting too, talking about modern technology and everything else, when you could look at your telephone and you can see what's going on at that pump station, that's really taking a step forward. So you don't have to run here and take a look at it. You can see it right on your phone.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
At least you have time to get your mind right what you're gonna be facing when you get there.
right.
And you can have somebody running on the way with help to give you a hand.
Yeah.
All right, anything else?
I just wanted to voice my concern that we're not finished with the project yet. And the board may wish to consider deferring a decision on the selection until we've got a certificate of occupancy and the required documentation on that. Because your opinion on an engineer may change depending on if we get tripped up here in the last 2 yards before the goal line.
When is that? Do we have a
They,
target for that?
the contractor has not asked for a final inspection yet.
Well, going back on that verbally today, the contractor said he thought that he could have it wrapped up in 2 weeks and have a CO. If that's the case, what is 2 weeks at this point in time, you know?
Well, his schedule has him starting now, right? Okay.
So,
Fair enough,
David,
2
if we
weeks.
were to select an engineering firm tonight, you then have to negotiate with them and reach an acceptable negotiation and bring back the demands to the board for approval?
Yes,
So we have no real exposure, except that you would have spent time negotiating a contract if we were to change engineers?
Well, Mr. Freer spoke to leverage in terms of that final payment being leverage on initiative to bring the project to fruition. I would think the non-selection of an engineering firm to do the next station may be further impetus to go ahead and get the contractor wrapped up.
We could always have a special meeting.
Well, and you do have a series of budget workshops over the
What-
course of the next several weeks, a month, that is totally acceptable to be added to that agenda, should you decide to do that.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to move forward on the project worse than me, well, Chris.
Right, Chris.
But I
Yeah, after
do
all this time, 2 weeks, yeah.
I do,
is
I do think
reasonable.
that, $1.5 million or whatever it is reason to be prudent
Okay.
and deliberate.
I accept that.
The only other point, Chris, I think that I discussed today was the potential of fugitive gases, and talking to the contractors about that, making sure that we have some ways of being able to detect that.
Yeah, he's actually supposed to give me some price on what it would take to do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Clemens, for you and all of your staff,
Yep, thanks.
what you do. Number 11, Town Clerk, Ms. Fennel.
The ordinance in the board's packet was prepared based on the feedback from the last meeting, so it's there for the board's consideration.
I guess I'll speak to that.
If there's anyone that cannot hear, raise your hand. I see a couple of you stretching your necks. Just raise your hand and we'll talk more into the mics. Okay?
Okay. I have reviewed the ordinance 19-03, Chapter 50, solid waste, on page 55 of the packet, and determined that the town staff has incorporated the changes outlined in the summary section of the statement letter and the motion approved at last month's scheduled BOC meeting. I make a motion that we approve the changes as outlined in 10-03, Chapter 50, solid waste as written on page 45, starting on page 45.
I second that.
Discussion?
Can I just make one observation, which is that this is exactly what was proposed last month. But I am recommending, after a conversation with Mr. Sullivan, that just the civil penalty language be revised to reflect consistency with the rest of the town's ordinances. Specifically, it should say that any person who violates any provision of the chapter shall be subject to a $50 per day civil fine in accordance with 10.99B of this code of ordinances. That's what the rest of the ordinances say. It doesn't, if they violate it, they get fined, if they are notified of that, obviously.
Okay,
Okay.
so,
Wordsmithing.
pardon me?
Wordsmithing,
Okay, so you're just superseding what you provided previously?
yeah. I took that out of what your motion was, but this
Okay.
is more consistent.
Okay. And that was the whole attempt at trying to be consistent?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I'd just like to, if I can, to revise that motion to include the consistency statement that was just said pertaining to the penalty.
I agree.
Okay? Madam Clerk, you good with that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any more discussion?
Yes.
All right, sir.
Okay. I would like to address the entire ordinance, and before I do that, I'd like to speak to a little bit about how we got to this point. And as I go step by step through this analysis, I'd like you to consider why it's deemed so important that we revise what we had previously worked on, the current ordinance, why we have to revise it at this time. So, the background of this is that there were a lot of issues that were identified and brought to the attention of the town. And back in 2007, with the prior Board of Commissioners, the town manager suggested that there be a solid waste work group formed to address all of the different issues rather than doing things piecemeal. That group was formed in August of 2017. That group worked independently, and they came before this board in February of last year, having considered all of the issues that were brought to their attention and having discussed them. Commissioner Kwiatkowski was brave enough to step forward and try to lead this program so that we could get a unified, comprehensive solid waste program in place. She worked with the town staff, she worked with the town attorney, and then presented to us, the board, in September, a wide-ranging plan with some suggestions of what we should do and with options of what we could do and what we were capable of doing as a town and as a community. In September, we discussed some of these issues, and at that point, we decided that we would expand the twice-a-week pickup from what it currently is. We'd expand it on both ends for a few weeks because we seemed to see that the season here was growing, so we were going to accommodate that. We also decided that if you had to have 3 trash cans, that one of those could be replaced by a recycle bin, so you wouldn't have to have 3 trash cans and a recycle bin, that the recycle bin would take the place of one of those. That was in September. In October, there was an initial draft done for this ordinance. We all looked at it, we all discussed it, we had a chance to make revisions and suggestions, and we did that. In November, we had a chance to look at the second revised ordinance. We did that again. We looked at it, we made suggestions, we revised it. In December, we voted on it. So we looked at it at least 3 times. This entire group looked at it at least 3 times before we voted on it. Had the community look at it, published it, discussed it in innumerable times. Almost immediately after we voted on it, some of my colleagues decided that we should change the ordinance that we had worked over a year and a half on that we voted on. On February 5th, we had a special meeting where we spent an hour and a half discussing whether or not we should revise this ordinance or whether or not we should take the simple step of extending the time within which we would start to enforce the ordinance. Move it from May of this year to May of next year so that we could have a trial run and that people could be educated and would know what was expected of them. I thought that that's what we had agreed upon when I left that meeting. But clearly, that's not what we agreed upon, because less than 2 weeks later, exactly 2 weeks later, on the 19th, the last board meeting, we had this proposal to change the entire ordinance, and the result of that proposal, which was passed again last meeting, is what we have before us tonight. So I just wanted to give everybody, let them understand that we didn't just vote on that ordinance quickly without giving it a lot of due diligence and consideration, but we're trying to revise it without giving it the due diligence and consideration that it deserves. So if we look at the ordinance, I believe that what we should do, and what I discussed on the 5th and last month, hasn't changed much, is that we've worked as a town. That committee was comprised of residents, non-resident owners, people who worked in the rental industry. It had input from just about every facet of the community, and they came up with recommendations based on what they found. We Commissioner Kwiatkowski tried to implement those or incorporate those recommendations into the comprehensive plan. And as I said, after we discussed it numerous times, we voted on it. It's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. But I don't believe that we should take 18 months of work and discard it. Because if we don't do, if we adopt this ordinance tonight, we're never going to touch this again. We're never going to touch it again. So you're going to have your trash cans out. Nobody's going to pick them up. It makes no sense. We have one component that we have to work on, and that component is the rollout. And so I believe that if we extend this, just all we have to do is leave the ordinance we have in place, change the enforcement date from May of 2019 to May of 2020. I believe that in that time frame, we can work out the rollout issue rather than going back, because this current ordinance that we're looking at, I don't know how many people actually looked at it, but it takes us back and puts us in a position, in my opinion, that's worse than when we started working on it 18 months ago. Because you can just roll out your can at any time. There is no control over when you roll your can out. But on the flip side, the town now is going to absorb the cost of rolling back everybody's can. I don't see how that works. Why would we allow a can to be out for a week, but then want to roll it back on the back end? If we're going to worry about having cans off of all the streets, it should be on the front end and the back end, not just on the back end. It just doesn't make sense. It won't accomplish anything, and we're going to be paying an extra $50,000 to $78,000, depending on who the vendor is, for that service. So let me go back to my notes here, because I've run ahead of myself a little bit. The proposed revision simply does not solve the problems identified by the Solid Waste Working Group and merely results in an increased expenditure of tax dollars without any return on that expenditure, while actually making the situation worse. Every city, town, and village that I've ever lived in, and I would imagine most of you have lived in, has some sort of regulation about when you can put out your trash can and when the trash can has to be taken back to your home. I have never lived in a place where they didn't have restrictions on that. So it is not unusual and overly harsh for us to have those restrictions, right? As I said, we'll have no rules. So if somebody misses the trash pickup on Saturday, that can will lay on the curb, at the curb, until the next Saturday. Makes no sense to me. There's a provision that we're going to take a full can and roll that, and leave that at the curb. We're not gonna roll that back. And every time that's discussed, the reason that is given that we don't want to roll it back is because, my God, it'll make the house stink. Or we have animals, and those animals will get into it, and they'll spread the trash around. Well, I happen to think that it's better that if an animal gets into it and spreads the trash around, it happens under the house of the person who failed to follow the ordinance, rather than having it all over Ocean Boulevard or the neighbor's yard. I may be crazy, but that's what I think. And I feel the same way about the smell. If it's going to smell, maybe that'll remind them next time to put the trash out when they should. It's just simple. I shouldn't be, nor should you, be the one who has to suffer because somebody else doesn't do what they're supposed to do. The reason we have this ordinance before us tonight is because my colleagues have repeatedly stated that after the vote, they immediately understood, or within a short period of time, understood that that vote was a mistake, that it was darn near impossible for people to comply with this rollout because we have this unique community here. And I say, I don't think that that's a legitimate concern. It's overstated, and we'll never know whether this can be complied with if we don't have this time frame where it's in place, and we give the homeowners and the visitors and everybody else an opportunity, and we see how it works. We don't even, this one, it does not even want to give it a chance to see if it's going to work, right? And I'll say this, I've raised this issue 3 times. I've never gotten a good answer. But the people in Winding River give me hope because they comply with these rules. They have rules there. And when if this ordinance is passed, they're still going to have the same rules there. So even though they're on this island, the people in Winding River are going to have to roll their can out at a certain time and take their can back at a certain time. Now, I ask you, are the people in Winding River more conscientious than the rest of the people who live on the island? Are they more resourceful than the people who live on the rest of the island? Are they more civic-minded than the people who live on the rest of the island? Are they more law-abiding than the people who live on the rest of the island? And clearly, the answer is no. But somehow, they abide by the rules. They put their can out and they take their can back. So it's not a question, and I've been told time and time again that the reason that really there's a difference is because they have covenants. That doesn't go to the ability of what a person can do. It just goes to a rule. The rule is there. We have an ordinance. Our ordinance said that you had to have the trash can back by 6 o'clock or put it out no earlier than. That ordinance was always in place. It just wasn't enforced. But I doubt that there are many people who are shocked when they come here to find out that there's an ordinance. Because where they live now, where their primary home is, there are ordinances that have them put out their trash at a certain time. So, the rollback provision that's included in tonight's revised ordinance, we agreed to that. And we agreed to that because it was an integral part of the whole comprehensive plan. But it makes no sense to me, again, to spend $50,000 or $70,000, depending on who the vendor is, of taxpayer money to make sure the cans go back, but cans can lay out there for a week on the front end. It just doesn't make sense. So without having the roll-out provision, I don't see why we should pay for the rollback provision. And so, again, I ask, to me, this is a problem that we can easily solve by just extending the time within which the enforcement of the fines occurs, rather than revising the whole ordinance that we worked so hard to put together. And within the next year, we should be able to come up with a solution to the rollout, have a comprehensive plan, and all of us can live happily ever after. Thank you.
I would actually like to add to that one of the things about rolling all of the cans back also had to do with the concern about children ducking behind cans, not being seen at the street. We wanted the cans away from the street for the majority of the week. And it was interesting that at the end of last Board of Commissioners meeting, when we came back out, there was a discussion and some public comment. It was actually acknowledged by some of the commissioners that, yes, it can be a risk to have cans at the curb and children can dart out from behind them. It can happen. So I go back again to the whole point of getting the cans, whether they are empty or full, back away from the street in the rollback, and that was one of the biggest points of this whole program, and yet it is being undone. So there will be cans sitting around for days. And again, if somebody wants to pull a can out 2 hours after pickup, it's just gonna stay there till the next pickup, which means in off-season, it will be sitting there for a week, up to a week. And during season, 3 or 4 days, but those 3 or 4 days during season, when you have a lot of kids around, it's just a hiding hazard. So I honestly do not understand not rolling all of the cans back away from the street.
Any more comments, questions? What's your pledge? You ready to vote?
Ready to vote, Mr. Mayor?
Pardon me?
I have a couple comments, actually. A lot of work, we learned a lot, and a lot of those provisions were included in this ordinance. You know, the extra, you can add an extra, you don't need to add an extra if you have a recycling, whole island rollback. The problem is, what we discovered is what we've discovered in other ordinances. We went to the end, we passed this ordinance, and then we got an immense amount of public feedback. And this happened many times. I can count, we all know, development fee, there's other things that this happened. We passed an ordinance, and we didn't get the feedback that we really wanted or needed, would be a better word. So we got a tremendous amount of public feedback from people that don't live on the island. And that's what we're reacting to be honest with you. And I think that's fair enough. We should do better. I've talked about, this is a systemic problem here that we need to correct our communication plan or somehow how we do business so we don't have to go through this process over and over again. We all know the development fees. That was another one that was obvious. And hopefully we don't have this problem with other things going forward. So it's not like we ignored everything. We actually, in this ordinance, there's some components that we agreed upon. The other thing that I just don't agree with, I've never lived in a community where they rolled back your trash cans. So we are unique from any community I've ever lived in. There's Concord, Charlotte, they do not roll back your trash can. So it is unique. I think those are the main points that I'd like to make.
I guess then I would ask, because nobody wanted to address it, please explain to me and the audience why it's necessary to change this ordinance now when all we have to do is change the enforcement date and give ourselves time to make a better ordinance to address the rollout, rather than disregarding all of the work that was done. Because the extended time, that's in the current ordinance. Those actions are in the current ordinance. They don't require any revision. The only thing that we're doing here tonight is revising the rollout. That's the only thing. We've agreed on everything else. So there is one issue, and that's the rollout issue. And I can't believe that we can't come to some kind of accommodation that will better serve the community if we work on it than to just shrug our shoulders, kick the can down the street, whatever you want to call it, and disregard. We were elected to take care of some problems, and we're not taking care of a problem tonight. We're just not.
You may say to the audience that we're not resolving a problem. I'm not going to say the number of emails I got, but I am going to remember the 80+% of the people that own homes on this island, many of which do not rent their homes, many of which want to come here and enjoy the island. Now, they may come on a Thursday or a Friday. They leave on a Saturday or Sunday. They don't take their trash with them. They put their trash cans out on that Sunday night or that Saturday night when they leave. Trash collection is on Tuesday. Tuesday, the cans, that can is then emptied. That can then, per the new, or the revisions in this ordinance, that can is then taken back, rolled back to the house. If it's a house that's on ground level, the side of the house. If it's an elevated home, underneath the home. If there's a corral there, it goes into the corral. And that's another issue where we confused some of the population, because I got a few calls this week on that. Joe, I want to be able to paint my corral. Can I paint my corral, or do I have to take it down? No, paint your corral, is what I told the individual. That's 91 years of age that lives on this island. And full trash cans. Full trash cans. I've talked to a lot of people about it in town, and I'll tell you, in December, I may not have been aware, I probably was not aware of the fact that 80+% of the taxpayers of this town are homeowners that visit their home as a part-time basis, many of which, and I've said it before, do not rent their home. And so why are we going to penalize these people? You know, I've started talking this way since December. I have, and I don't want to bore you and read my statement letter again, but I read it in January, I read it in February. And then we decided to put a motion on the floor. And the motion is currently on the floor, and Mr. Mayor, I call for a vote.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.
No.
Madam Clerk, it's 3-2, the motion carries. I believe we're on number 12. Ms.
Is anybody who has voted for this motion going to ask that we do something to ensure that we have a rollback service?
You mean a rollout?
No, a rollback service. We don't have a current contract or anything pending, remember, it was
Yeah,
withdrawn,
that's an excellent question. Mr. Town Manager, I know that.
We have to action him.
Yeah. I know we had bids, but they were changed. Have they gone out with those changes? Have you rebid that?
No, we haven't rebid it because we didn't know what type of statement of work to craft in order to advertise for it. But if it's the wish of the board, then now we
Absolutely.
would do that. We would need to do that.
Okay.
Is that the consensus of the board?
Yes.
Yes.
Everybody in agreement? All right.
No.
No.
I don't see the utility in rolling the cans back if we're not going to have a time frame when they have to be rolled out. I just don't see it. I agree with what Mr. Freer said. We don't have that. Most people don't have that where they live. Rollback is unique.
Okay, we don't have a consensus to the board, so I'm gonna call for a vote of the board, if you'll make that a motion. Joe?
Well, first of all, we do have a rollback program for people that are on the boulevard. And that's been in place prior to 2007, because I tried to get the date on when that went in effect, but I asked David when were you hired? He said 2007, but it was prior to that. So what this would be is, and in the statement letter that I wrote, back then when the cans were decided to roll back to the house, it was probably done with an aesthetic concern and a safety concern. I gotta believe that. Now that the island has built up, in 2005, when I built my home, and now when I ride down Brunswick Avenue, when I ride all over this island, there's more homes here than I built in 2005, and they continue to be built. When I went down to the lift station this morning to have a look at that, I couldn't believe the number of homes that are being built on this island. And probably the best is yet to come. So if we were so concerned prior to 2007 about what the cans look like out there and the safety perspective and all that, then why don't we provide that to the entire town? And I understand the reason why and the logic associated with why we did it back then, but today is today.
So I'll make the motion, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor, that we instruct the town manager to put the bids out for the rollback for the entire island.
I second that.
Here we have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.
No.
Madam Clerk, 4-1. Are we ready to move on now? Ms. Ferguson, you want to try again?
We held a budget workshop on Thursday, March 7th. During that workshop, there was some discussion about items that would be considered for next fiscal year versus what may need to be considered in this fiscal year. One of the things discussed possibly for this fiscal year was a need to find a new sand source in order to construct the project to mitigate Hurricane Florence and Michael damages. The current volume for those damages exceeds our current permitted sand source. If you guys wish to move forward with that, the cost estimate from the engineer is $170,000. There's a budget amendment that is on page 51. There's a correction that needs to be made to that budget amendment. Fund balance appropriated should say increase instead of decrease.
Yeah.
I did follow up with the engineer because when these numbers were presented to you guys for, consideration in the budget workshops last year, the cost estimate that the engineer gave was $132,000. So, asked him, if he could tell me why there was the increase up to $170,000. His response by email as of, last week was that the updated effort includes an additional subcontractor for multi-beam bathymetry, which is required by DCM, as well as ATM effort for processing, analyzing all the data and driving the effort. So actually, I said last week was yesterday, Monday, March 18th. So, that is his, explanation for why there was the cost increase from 132 to 170.
We know that this is not all going to get done before the start of the next fiscal year. So why do we request the entire amount for the project to be moved instead of making a split between what we expect will be covered this year with the remainder in next year's budget? I mean, that's how I would have done it in my past, so.
It's a programmatic approach. We don't know exactly when we will have to enter into contracting with the various subcontractors. And what we'll do is, what doesn't get obligated, we'll have to roll it forward. And in effect, that second appropriation would be made in the upcoming year. Yeah, so it's a whole programmatic approach, if you will.
Okay.
And forgive me, what are these accounts to and from? Is that,
Professional services, beach, fund balance appropriated.
The fund balance appropriation is the revenue. You're appropriating new money and putting it on the table, and the professional services beach is the expense item.
that's B part, the B part?
Oh, yes, 50, yes, B part.
That's fine. That's what I was asking. Thank you. So to me, it's very appropriate because, you know, this is needed to, required to address what we lost in our engineered section of the beach, which is Central Reach. And it's the first step of the FEMA reimbursement of the Central Reach. That's correct, right? Okay.
Just a question, though. Couldn't we have equally taken it from our reserve fund?
Yes, you could. That's not what we proposed here in terms of the mechanics
Just
of
for
the.
future consideration, though, we would think that this is something that could fall under
Yes, ma'am.
that reserve fund as
Yes.
well.
The,
We have several reserve
The-
funds.
the sand reserves,
fund.
yeah.
We could have, right,
Okay.
right.
yes,
Yep,
you,
yep.
you could have. The
that's
budget
being-
amendment would look quite different, but
And one other point, though. We're doing this so we can replenish the beach, but this cost that's associated with looking for the sand, am I right in that this could also be considered a reimbursable cost from FEMA?
it's a direct permitting requirement and would qualify as a reimbursable expense.
We ready for a motion?
Yeah, yeah.
I move that we approve ordinance amending ordinance number 1810, the Revenue and Appropriations Ordinance for fiscal year 2018-2019, amendment number 5.
Could you qualify with that with the correction that Mrs. Ferguson made from?
With the correction
change
that
from
Ms.
D-
Ferguson made.
Need a second?
Second.
Discussion?
We need sand.
Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no, it's unanimous. Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Mr. Hewitt, number 13.
Mr. Evans is actually the guy that knows about the bridge.
Take it easy on me, I got dirty feet. Been working. Not every these guys. The bridge, I had the opportunity to be able to visit with some NCDOT people last Thursday. It was a very informative meeting. I happen to live on a dirt road, and so I have conversations all the time with a young lady that's the engineer up there. And it's not really that pleasant, but I got the opportunity to sit in a room with her and have her glare at me for an hour when she figured out who I was. But anyway, they were very nice. They really came across with some information, and I'd had some feedback from the public as well. I'll start off with a couple of things about the bridge. Number one, there will not be a bike path on the bridge. It's not wide enough. There was never a plan to put a bike path way on the bridge, and they're not going to because it's not wide enough. So somehow that got out in the public, and they were getting a lot of feedback, and they asked me to put that out there. Second, in the discussions that we had and the back and forth, we got our point across, and they're going to work at the bathroom area and at the boat ramp area so that they can open those as fast as they can. We did get them to move, or they volunteered to move the laydown yard, so we found a new area for them to move so that the boats could be put in and out when they're not working down there. It wouldn't take up that whole space. So we do have that. Also, I'd like to say this in the public way because it came about it a little bit, is that we allow parking in the public right-of-ways in those areas, in certain areas down there, and although you can use the boat ramp, you may not be able to park because there's only a handful of parking places there anyway, but we're going to hope to encourage people who want to use the boat ramp to park in those public right-of-ways that the parking committee has identified as being areas to park in. They're not roped off down there yet, so if you're using a boat, you can put it where most of the boats overflow, is what I'm trying to tell you. Most of that boat trailer traffic overflows up there anyway, so that's available area. Now, their contract, I happen to have a copy of their contract for their times to work. They provided that to us, and basically, they will not be working between 5 and 9 a.m. The week before Memorial Day, the week after Labor Day. So they won't be working during those times. That's Monday through Thursday. Friday, starting that Friday at 5 a.m., and they will not be working again. They won't work from 5 a.m. on Friday until 9 p.m. on Sunday. So the bridge is open in those times. After Labor Day, then we end up with late closures and that kind of thing, and that'll run through. But holidays, Christmas, Easter, all those holidays, there won't be working, okay? So it's gonna be open then. Easter has an extended week, it's like Thursday to Monday, and some of those other holidays are extended as well. So, special events, their contract calls for them to close for special events. Did you get them a copy of the, so we provided them a copy of when we're having certain events and stuff, and their contract clearly says they won't work on those days. And if they do, they won't work during the day, they'll work at night, okay? The only conflict we know of at this time, I think, is the, the concerts. And I explained to them, and their words to me were basically, we won't start till Tuesday night, because apparently they have to be mobilized at 7 on Sunday, but the concerts go to 9. So if you've got them the list of events and the times, I'm assuming that they're gonna make adjustments. And I'll verify that at the next meeting, when I go to the next meeting. So that's what we know about the bridge. They milled it just like they said they would. They milled one lane and then milled the next lane. And what they're going to do is pave it the same way. So no lane should be, you know what I mean? There should be a clear, usable lane at all times. Yeah, they did say they would have it milled all at one time, but then it would go back in the same stages that they took it out.
Are they gonna concrete it or asphalt?
That I don't know. I think they're going to asphalt it. I think that that's what they're talking about. It's not actually not, they called it something else.
Can we put all this information on our website or redirect to their website if they have the information?
Well, they do have it on their website, but they said that I provided it to Heather, but if we decide to put it on a public information board, that we can.
Okay, good. We need to do that.
These times we can put up there.
What-
They're pretty specific, like Easter is 6 a.m. on Thursday till 9 p.m. on Monday. It's pretty specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes all the way through Independence Day. So,
What are they doing under there?
under the bridge, they're knocking away the old concrete. There's something that happens to it that causes it to turn to chalk, and they're taking it out and then they're repairing it.
It's a lot of work. It's
Yeah, but
very
they did-
comprehensive.
I think they did some work under it a couple of years ago. They're just going back and doing more now. It's just that it's got to be resurfaced at the same time. And they're also fixing, there's some areas that they're fixing that's not critical, is what they told me, but they're actually filling them in with some sort of a box and that kind of stuff.
So for the festival, obviously, there's going to be no impact, right?
That's what we're hoping,
Well-
that's what they're telling us. They have the dates and the times.
Okay. But
I think your idea is a great idea, to try to post it on our own website, but maybe prior to that, would it be a good idea for us to put together a document with the dates and the times and our understanding of what they said, and just send it to them and have them okay it and clear it with them,
Confirm.
just to confirm it?
Yeah, we've got.
Because basically what you were saying to me, I had a phone call from a nice lady on Crab Street Sunday night, and she was able to get a hold of a lady called Wanda at DOT in Wilmington, and she provided this individual with some of the information that you provided us with too as well. So she seems the lady said she's extremely nice, good to work with.
The town has all the contact information. We have the contact information for their actual inspectors on the ground, and that's who we're supposed to communicate through, except for the events and other stuff.
Yeah.
Scheduling goes through Wanda. So, and she does have some of the PR information as well. She's running the shows, by the way, Wanda. That's-
That's the name I got, yeah.
just like
So what's the outlook for duration?
The time period, it's actually on that is it on that piece?
It's 1 October.
Yes, and there's big penalties too. There's some portions of it that's $1,250 for every 15 minutes that they go over by their time period, and then $1,000 a day penalty. It's actually in this documentation.
So it's going all the way through the summer?
Yeah, all the way through the summer.
And how about the railing, that temporary railing?
That's exactly what they said it was gonna be. They came and laid all that out for everybody, and that temporary railing is actually the, what do you call it, it's not the mold, it's actually the skeletal, and there'll be, the stuff they put back will go back just like that is. That's actually laid it out, just like you would a house.
It's the template.
It's the template, that's the word I was looking for.
Like Christie was.
Yeah, thank you.
So is there any worry that summer, visitors are gonna go up there and put their hands on that and that kind of thing?
Well, that's the NCDOT, that's gonna be their responsibility. I'm assuming that they're going to be, when they're working or moving around and stuff, they'll be controlling the traffic on and off that bridge. But that is the NCDOT bridge.
Ms. Ferguson, would you like to speak?
I owe Commissioner Freer a better answer to his question now that I think about it. We have been communicating with the Merchants Association. As far as where they have staging, there may be impacts to some of the places that they put booths in the past that have to be moved, but they're aware of that situation.
Okay, and we'll adjust, right?
Good, good.
Well, unless they had booths on this side of that fence, between there and that road, on Sunset Slushy, there was booths in that area, in the road?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the word.
Really?
Yep.
Holy smokes. Okay, maybe I should make another spot. Okay.
Okay.
All right, have we discussed and finished?
I think we're good.
Number 14, Ms. Evans?
Okay. I hate to resemble what Peter was saying earlier. This is a good example of what Peter was saying earlier. When we started looking at commercial ordinance and we started putting together the commercial ordinance, it was based off of my knowledge of things that happened in other places, the information that we carried to the planning board. And what I was trying to do was to create a less dense atmosphere and protect the residential areas because we had that mixed use in them. The problem was that what I took as experience as being workable somewhere else and brought here is not going to work. I carried it to the planning board. They believed in good faith that it was a good thing. I guess I did a really good job of presenting it. But anyway, what happened was that we started to get feedback, even prior to sending out the stuff. But we started getting feedback, and the feedback was very productive, and it was very insightful. Some of the folks I've had conversations with are in here tonight, and we went back and looked, and it's not going to work. We're going to have to I'm recommending that we send it back to the planning board and let us vet it a lot more. There's some properties that it's gonna render completely unusable. There's a small piece right here. There's a little small piece right here that, it's a piece of commercial property. I'm assuming you can put a small eatery or ice cream place or something like that on. This will just make it unusable.
Oh, that triangle, right?
Triangle,
Okay.
there's a bigger lot over there would work on, and then a smaller lot over there, it would make it, because it's long and thin. And so, it needs to be looked at. Also, a good example would be, well, maybe Allen's, but Coastal Insurance, Coastal Realty over here, they would probably have some issues, unless they were grandfathered. They wouldn't be able to build their building back because of the setbacks back, because that frontal dune is actually pushed right up on top of them. So as we looked, places like the condominiums, places where residential stuff would be going, that kind of thing, it wouldn't have affected them. But it was really going to affect some existing properties that were commercial already. So these would be bid. I'm recommending that it go back to the planning board before we send it anywhere.
But you're not saying that going back to the planning board is the public hearing. You're saying go back to the planning board, then have, okay, that's
Yeah,
what.
I'm saying go back to the planning board, let us re-vet it
Okay.
quite a bit more. Let me bring to them each and every parcel of property, because that's what happened. When we started looking at the individual pieces of property and getting the feedback from the people that owned it, it became clear that there was gonna be some major issues.
Yeah,
It was gonna impact us financially.
Yeah, we're
Can the
not-
planning and zoning board have the public hearing themselves?
No.
They can't do that?
We're-
But but if by sending it back, now, we've already done it once, but by sending it back, that gives the public another opportunity to come and give feedback. And it's out there and everybody has a better look at it. So it kind of helps alleviate some of the stuff that Peter was talking about earlier about, we somehow managed to I know we follow the rules when we do this, but I think it's because of the demographics of the town, how many people live here, how many people don't live here. A lot of people own property here, that may live in Raleigh, whether it's commercial or residential. So our information is slower to, like in Carolina Shores, they put it on a board and everybody sees it, or here's about a week. Here, our information is slower to get out there and get out.
And we're not in a hurry.
No, we're not, there's nothing.
We had also done that extra advertising or notification to the residential properties that are adjacent to it on the outside of the zone. That went out a week or so ago, and Tim was on the receiving end of some of those queries and feedback also.
Okay, yeah, I'll make a motion that we send this back to the P and Z board for further consideration.
Second?
Discussion, hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. It's unanimous, Madam Clerk. Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Fletcher, number 15.
Some of this is just an update from the audit committee to the board, and what is a clarification. Number one, the audit committee asked that we organize a 2-hour workshop, and I suggest provided by the LGC or the League of Municipality staff, to improve Board of Commissioners and Audit Committee's understanding of municipal finance accounting. 2 of them are new to the audit committee, and being a part of an audit committee is pretty challenging. It takes a while to get accustomed, but they would appreciate that. So my recommendation is that I will contact League of Municipalities and ask if they can do that for them at our next audit committee meeting, which will be public, held here, open to the public, as well as to any of the commissioners that would want to sit through that program, just detailing exactly how municipal finance is different than corporate finance or not-for-profit finance, and just improve their skills. That was just a request, and I'll do that. 2, I got, not only from them but others, recommendations to gain a complete explanation from the audit firm Reeves and Associates as to the causes for the significant delay in the completion of the 2018 annual audit. If the board agrees, I will contact the auditor from Reeves and Associate and ask them to document that for us and provide a document to the audit, or to the Board of Commissioners, as well as to the audit committee in that respect. I think I probably need an agreement from the board if that's okay. Seem reasonable?
Madam Clerk, do we have to have a motion or just a request, or how do you want to go about doing that?
If that's what the board's desire is, that
Would this not be explained in the report itself, since the report is going to be so late? Just a question, wouldn't they be giving a justification of why it's so late?
Not normally, we just get the report. Normally, you would just get the report. It doesn't say why it was in December or November, or, they could, but
There's a presentation that the board is given upon delivery of the document. There's a public presentation to the commissioners that you receive.
But you're saying that presentation does not include this?
it may not. And
Okay,
we
may
we
not.
could always
Okay.
question the auditor at that board meeting, but the audit committee was asking that they would like to know why it's now so late, because they will have to now pick a new auditor, and if it's the auditor's fault, they may choose not to pick that auditor. So that's their request, that they'll do it for them, not necessarily for you, but
So I guess, Heather, you want me to make a motion to accept number 2? Okay.
if that would work.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to gain a complete explanation from the audit firm as to the cause of the significant delay in the completion of the 2018 annual audit.
obviously I'll second that.
I guess I would actually say I think it might be even more effective if we just agreed that when they come and give their presentation, that we follow up and ask the questions and ask for full clarification, which will allow all 5 commissioners to be involved if they hear something that prompts more questions. I mean, it's another way of doing it. And I
We,
think it could be equally effective.
we could ask them to do it at that time. This way
Yeah.
they come with
Well-
those answers.
So we had a motion and a second. I think we call it for a vote.
We had a motion, we had a second, and we had some discussion.
Some discussion.
So I
So
don't know
yours-
if you're through the discussion or
Any
not.
any other discussion?
Can you repeat the precise motion again? You're gonna,
He gave the motion.
Yeah, to contact them to gain a complete explanation from the audit firm Rives and Associates as to the causes for the significant delay in the completion of the 2018 annual audit.
I think maybe by asking them now for the explanation, we may enhance the acceleration of the completion of the audit as well. But the audit committee needs to know as soon as possible, if they were involved, it's their fault, then we may not want to use them next year. And that's, we've got audit committee members
I
here that,
understand. Okay.
You gotta wait for the mayor to come back.
Yeah.
so we'll call for a vote. Those in favor?
Just wait,
We
wait,
have to-
No, no,
wait for the mayor.
Oh, he's gone. I'm in
Didn't pass the
charge.
gavel.
Oh, he
I
passed
have a
it.
gavel.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Can I have a gavel? Call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? So it's 5-0, Madam Clerk.
4, 5, 6,
It's 5-0, yeah. The third was, that they asked that the monthly financial statements prepared for the board and the audit committee be done in Excel format with formulas and to show each fund individually with revenues followed by expenses for each fund. We've actually done that to some extent already. David's giving it to me now, but without formulas. And it was, these accountants that are on the board are pretty good at analysis, and they would like to have it in a Excel format, and I think we would also like to have it in Excel format. So they're asking for it for themselves, but if the board would like to have it also, it would apply to the board. And they've already asked David for that.
So it's not causing any more work.
So you're just formalizing that request?
Yes.
Okay.
It requires more work in that it has to be converted from the existing software over to the Excel format, which requires, that's a manual process, and then it also requires an additional formatting step in order to make sure that, that the columns don't shrink everything up into an unreadable GOM. And it also requires a quality control to make sure that there's nothing lost in the translation between the two softwares.
Approximately how much time does that take?
It's a matter of having to go through the entire budget line by line to make sure that everything's okay. I mean, it depends on how much risk is acceptable in terms of the documents.
Our software doesn't have an output in Excel?
Yeah, that's where the conversion takes place.
Yeah, but it-
The software
isn't
does
it
it,
just,
yeah.
it's
Right.
not a click to say,
It is, but when that
Save
conversion
as.
takes place, oftentimes there are formatting inconsistencies
Okay.
that make the document unreadable, and you have to go through and clean it up.
sure, okay. But I think it's well worth it.
I'd just like to understand, though, what, I mean, I know the audit committee has talked at times, and so have some members of the board, about looking at the data in a different way, which I understand. However, if the purpose is to look at the data a different way, and then bring it to a meeting for discussion in a different way, I would remind everybody that that then has to be audited, sort of audited by a second person to make sure it's accurate. The very things David's raising, that you can manipulate and things can go wrong. So if somebody's going to rearrange things, look at groupings in a different way, before it's brought for a discussion, it does need to be double-checked.
Okay.
Okay, I mean, that's just, because I certainly don't want to have to go through every calculation and recheck everything.
Yep.
So that should just be on everybody's sort of radar. And that kind of thing would be given out ahead of time for people to look at.
Right.
Well, fundamentally, the budget officer is the responsible agent to provide budget information to the Board of Commissioners.
I know.
Whenever we provide information out and it comes back, I cannot attest to what may or may not have been done to that. So I cannot confirm the integrity of that data when it comes back, once it leaves my hand.
I wasn't assuming you would be the one doing it. I'm saying that if a committee wants to look at data a different way and then bring it for discussion, that is going to have been double-checked by someone and not the town necessarily to make sure that it is accurate. I mean, obviously, if you are asked, David, to present data in a different way by the board, as you say, if the board wants something, you know, that's part of what I do. But I know that there are people who do want to look at things a different way themselves, which is fine. But if they're going to bring it for conversation and discussion, we have to know that it was double-checked.
So David, is it an unreasonable request of you?
No, we can do that. It's just that when it leaves, I'm not responsible for what happens to it and it comes back. But I'd like to ask a question as to just what the audit committee's function is regarding budget information, because the audit committee is not a budget committee. It is an advisory committee on processes and controls. So if is there a desire to make the audit committee responsible for budgetary compilations, I don't think that that's in their charter.
How did you come to make them budgetary issues? It's the financial statements, the monthly and quarterly financial statements.
Those are budget to actual runs,
Okay.
and
you
that
don't-
is
you
the
don't think
data
audit
that
committee
I've.
should worry about the accuracy of them or the content of them?
I'm sorry, I interrupted
You're saying
you.
that they shouldn't be concerned with the accuracy or the content of the financial statements?
Well, the budget statement is a ordinance and is as the Board of Commissioners adopted it. So it is as accurate when it is parlayed on a monthly basis as the day it was when it was adopted.
But the actual numbers, to-date numbers, are not to be questioned?
Well, they could be questioned, but now you're talking a process review type function instead of a manipulation of data into a different way of looking at things.
Well, but that would be an accountant's view of how to analyze it, but to compare with whatever. But the audit committee does have responsibility for looking at the content and judging whether or not there are issues with it, such as, is the amount reasonable? If the actual to date turns out to be less one month than it was the month before, they have a reason to say, well, how can that be? How can those expenses have gone down over the last month? Or some miscellaneous account has some really large number, and they have a fair question of asking, how did that happen to come about? But that's just what the audit committee does. And they do have that obligation, and their charter calls for them to look at that.
Okay, I guess I'm just a little,
But that's not bringing different types, formats of data back to the Board of Commissioners. That's a review of budget to actual information and querying the efficacy of the transactions that have taken place on a per accomplishment time. The rationale for providing Excel, listen, we can provide the Excel spreadsheets, that's a piece of cake. It will take some time, it's a mechanical thing, but I was of the understanding that the impetus behind that was to manipulate that data in order to portray it differently to the board.
No, not at all.
Okay, then
Not
I
at
stand
all.
corrected.
Not at all, no. That's just for their own personal use of understanding better how things are going, comparing to previous periods or to other, whatever they choose to do it with.
Okay.
Okay, did we take a vote already or not?
Did you,
We did not?
you want to repeat the motion?
Okay, I'm still confused though, because then I don't see that an Excel format compared to the current format allows you to evaluate the current status against budget any more accurately,
Well, it's
okay?
not that it does it against budget. If I want to know what the total town's expenses are, they're spread over 3 different funds.
Yeah.
And if I want to drag those, say, the salaries out of 2 funds and put them so I can see the total expense for the town, which is an audit committee obligation to understand that, then you need to be able to have Excel to do that, because you don't do that with a PDF form.
No, I know, you do it with a calculator.
Yeah, or or
Yeah,
you use,
I did it last year.
use Adobe Acrobat and you just,
No, I did it with a calculator
you can do that
last
too,
year,
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But this shouldn't be a major issue, and the audit committee asked for it, the board asked for it before, and now they're just asking, the new audit committee's asking for that to be in an Excel format by fund.
So repeat the motion.
Requested to have the monthly financial statements prepared for the board and the audit committee. In fact, let's just make it for the audit committee. Have
No, and the board.
board and the audit committee in Excel format, and to show each fund individually with revenue followed by expenses for each fund.
I've got a question. I'm sorry to have
Go ahead,
interrupted
go ahead.
you, please tell me. Heather, can we just post that up on the website?
No.
In an Excel, and just to post a file on the website?
If I can, I don't know how to do that. I can look, but I don't believe so.
I mean, if we're gonna do that, why don't we just put it out there for the
That's what
world?
we asked
Anybody
before.
who wants to look at it.
Then you
do it.
wouldn't,
From my industry experience, we would never do anything like that, because that could be taken down, manipulated, and misrepresented by somebody
Well,
too easily.
You gotta realize that once you put an open source document, when that's provided to the commissioners or the audit committee, that now becomes a public record, and it can be obtained by request. Right now, it's locked down as a PDF, as a hard copy PDF, and you can go get it if you want to, but it wouldn't be able to be mechanically or manipulated. It was just a question I had.
make it another question?
Just listening to what was just said, would it behoove us to go to the firm that did the internal control audit and ask if it's wise to put this out there in a form that can be manipulated by someone other than who would like to manipulate it, rather than the PDF form that you now get? Is it worth, if you look at it as a cost, is it worth the risk to do what you'd like to do rather than what you're currently getting?
But I already can take the PDF and use Adobe Acrobat and convert it.
Okay?
I can do it now. I just thought if the town has a button to push that puts it in Excel format, it's quicker than me going through the problem of buying Acrobat and doing that. But if the board feels that's problematic for the
I will
town,
second your motion.
I'll ask one question, if I may, for further clarification. What you're talking about is basically the budget to actual statements that come out of our accounting system, which is the Logic software.
Right.
That's the runs that you're talking about. Okay, those actual, I know that you requested specifically in there that they have formulas obtained in it. Those, that data does not contain formulas in the budget to actual software.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in the runs, in the accounting system. They
So
do
they'll have
not
to-
contain formulas.
They'll have to validate the numbers themselves. Okay, you call for a vote, Mr. Mayor.
Chair's been asked to call for a vote. Is that the wishes of the board?
Yes, sir.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. It's unanimous, Madam Clerk. I assume we're now moving to number 17.
Number 4.
There's another item.
What?
Number 4, and in the audit committee, we discussed it. I've discussed it individually with a number of people and with the town manager. They would like to have confirmation be given to the town manager, finance director, that any proposed internal control changes, including those resulting from the RSM internal control evaluation, would initially be presented to the audit committee by the town manager, finance director for review and comment. The audit committee would then provide their recommendations to the Board of Commissioners.
I have one comment on that, which is there are statutorily prescribed internal control procedures that the finance director does not have the ability to not engage. So it wouldn't matter if the audit committee agreed or did not agree, the finance officer is charged by statute with doing certain things, as long as you're not changing.
We understand, no, we just,
But it's my job to point that out.
I do not agree with that. I believe that it is the Board of Commissioners' duty. We have a report in front of us. We have the fiduciary responsibility, not just for the budget, but to make sure that this town's finances are run appropriately. That is our responsibility, and the audit committee is there to give us advice as we need it. This report is indicating, as we've discussed, that there are some things that need an improvement plan, and that improvement plan should be between the Board of Commissioners and the town manager, who is also the budget officer, who is also the finance manager, to set up an improvement plan that will then be measured and watched as a major objective. That allows us to have the discussions, to have the agreements, and again, if the audit committee's input is necessary because there is some clarification needed, it is always there for us to request. But to me, this is a performance issue between the Board of Commissioners and the town manager. And that report was between the Board of Commissioners and RSM.
the report was, but it pointed out that we have significant weaknesses in internal control. We've put together a board of 5 accounting experts, 5 financial experts. If we don't use their skills, I wonder why we would have an audit committee.
You are there, and this was very clear, and there is no doubt that this was laid out, that you are there to confirm that the systems are in place and implemented, and confirm that management implements audit report recommendations. However, the improvement plan that has to be put together, again, to me, is between the town manager, budget officer, finance officer, and the Board of Commissioners to come to agreement on, and that should be the first place where it is presented and discussed. And then if further information or clarification is needed that is beyond this Board of Commissioners' capability, then we can get the advice of the audit committee. I think this is more of an improvement plan that is like an employee improvement plan rather than some deep detail in CPA auditing knowledge. A lot of these things are fairly straightforward when you read the descriptions and you look at different websites about what's being recommended and the kinds of information that's necessary. But again, if there was anything that was unclear, the audit committee, of course, their opinion would be sought, their advice would be sought. But it should come to the board first.
I have no problem utilizing expertise that we currently have on the auditing committee. These are CPAs. These are folks that are well qualified, more qualified than I am to look at, and I would appreciate any comments, suggestions, or recommendations that they would have going forward.
I agree. I wouldn't even know what to ask. I'd be afraid I wouldn't know, what to bring forward to the audit committee. I would like them to look at it as a whole and review it from their expertise. I am not a financial, I don't have any background in finance.
I would just say that when I read this and I compare it to the report that we received, many of the deficiencies that were noted were the absence of having a checklist. And so before the town manager could take the simple move of saying, you know what, they're right, that's pretty simple. I'm going to institute a checklist for this particular process. He couldn't do that until he came to the audit committee and got their approval. it just seems to me like this is overreaching. It would be much simpler to say that the town manager, like he does in everything, he makes, or the financial officer, makes those decisions, and if we have a question about it, well, then we have a question about it, and we can ask the audit committee at that point if they agree with it. But to need to get approval from the audit committee, to me, seems like you're really expanding the charter of the audit committee into areas that no other committee on this island has.
You use the word approval, that's
Approval,
not,
no.
that's not in the,
They're not approving anything.
they're not
No,
approving
They're
anything.
just, they're just looking at the internal control recommendation
Right.
that the town manager has put in place and say, that makes good sense. That should get the job done.
But you're saying that they have to look at it before he does it.
No,
And-
how can we look at it before he does it if he hasn't done it? Come on. He's
It's-
got to
it
do it
says here-
first, and then he would
it
bring it to
says
the audit
here-
committee, say,
wait,
this is
wait.
how I solve the problem.
Confirmation to the town manager that any proposed internal changes, so
Yes, yes.
proposed.
Well, he has to develop them to propose it.
But this is my point. This is my point. So if his proposal is that, I just looked at this report, and there are 5 instances where they identify a checklist as not being there, before he can go to the people that work there tomorrow and say, we're using this checklist, he has to go to the audit committee.
Not at all, not at all. He can do that anyway.
It does appear that that's how it's drafted.
That's the
That
way,
is what's
that's what
written.
the language says, a proposed change. I mean, it says a proposed change.
His proposed solution to the RSM report,
It,
but he's free to do it right
I don't know
now
what we're
without
voting on,
coming to
because
anybody.
when I read that, it says a
What's
proposed
written in
change.
the packet, Commissioner Fletcher, is that any proposed internal control procedures would initially be presented to the audit committee by the town manager. So he is presenting it in advance of being able to do it, the way that it's written. Strictly reading the words that are on item number 4, it appears that the town manager, before implementing an internal control change, would have to present his proposed internal control change to the audit committee for review and comment, and then the audit committee would then bring it to the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you.
That's what it says. I don't know if that's.
Well, I don't see that it says before he can do it. And
Well,
my view on any audit committee I'm on,
I don't-
the
I don't have a
finance
problem
director,
with that, to
the
be
finance
honest with
director does it.
I don't have a problem with that.
The Board of Commissioners has duties, and it seems to me that these duties are being pushed to the audit committee.
No, I don't think I'm saying that.
That's,
The audit committee's charter does include some internal control. I mean, that is part of the charter. My concern, if I was the Board of Commissioners, would be that you are requiring a person who is required by statute to exist, the finance officer, to, if he saw something tomorrow that needed to be addressed, that he would first have to get a meeting of the audit committee so that he could propose something, so that then it could come to the Board of Commissioners. He is required to do certain things. He's also a bonded officer that is required by statute to be the finance officer. So if David saw something tomorrow in the computer system, I've read the RSM report, but numbers aren't my thing, we talked about it earlier. But if he saw something that needed to take immediate attention, then he's going to have to either call an emergency meeting of the audit committee, which likely that is not something that would be very easy, and then he'd have to have the audit committee get an emergency meeting of the Board of Commissioners. You're handicapping the finance officer from addressing something that may need to be taken care of immediately. If it was a virus in the computer software, if it was an error on the spreadsheet, we talked about spreadsheets, I can't really think of any examples because I'm not an auditor, but I can see that you are adding 2 layers before the finance.
Actually, this is probably my fault of using the wrong word, and my experience is what we normally do. He does his job, and he has implemented a change. He would bring it to the audit committee when the next committee, and says, this is how I solved that problem. And the audit committee would say, that makes good sense. And we would advise the board, he solved that problem, but he would do it on his own. We wouldn't,
You want him to.
I want him to implement it,
Immediately.
decide how he wants to fix the problem.
So you want him to inform you of changes that he makes?
Yeah.
That's much different than
Yeah,
what you
it
wrote
is.
there.
So it's not
Much different.
proposed, but the ones he's actually implemented. the improvements he's implemented. So I'd modify the resolution that any improvements in internal control that he has implemented. Because you certainly don't want to wait for a meeting to do a control that he needs to be implemented.
It takes more than that.
Yeah.
Think it over and rephrase what you want us to vote on, because again, that's not what we're talking about here.
So I'll amend the resolution. Confirmation to the town manager, finance director, that any implemented internal control improvements, including those resulting from the RSM internal control evaluation, would be presented to the audit committee by the town manager, finance director for review and comment. The audit committee would then provide their recommendation to the board of commissioners.
Much better.
Yeah, I think.
That makes sense.
That clears it up.
You agree? You agree?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
That makes sense.
I make- yeah.
I think that clears it. Clarifies it.
But just to
So-
come, I
so
mean,
that-
this make, in no way would you slow David down from making his improvements that he needs to make. It's just that after he's done, and he could even come say, I've used it for a month now, and this is the way we solve that major issue, and the audit committee judges it and says, good job, well done, and tells the board that improvement did the job. It corrected the deficiency, we shouldn't see that again.
So that,
But nothing to slow down the town manager in making the improvements.
okay. So that was a motion.
That was the motion.
I
Do you
second
agree with the
motion.
changes?
Yes, yes, sir.
Can you read it again, Heather, please?
Believe that it is to, that the town manager, finance director, confirmation to the town manager, finance officer that any implemented internal control changes, including those resulting from the RSM internal control evaluation, would initially be presented to the audit.
Not initially.
Sorry,
Not initially, drop the initially.
to the audit committee by the town manager, finance director for review and comment, and then the audit committee would provide their recommendation to the board.
So it's after he's put it in place, he informs you for you to, so
And they
once
judge,
something's
they
put
will
in
review it, and say, that
place.
makes good sense.
So
That-
once
that works
something's
fine.
put in place, then you guys look at it, see that it's working or will work,
And they would advise the
and
board
then advise the board.
that that major problem has been taken care of. Okay,
Okay.
I think we're ready for a vote, sir.
Okay, call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Unanimous. Are we back to the agenda?
She's,
Yes, sir.
Heather has her last one, I think,
16.
number 16.
Is it you?
Am I
You
good?
didn't speak in the microphone.
The new general schedule for the local government agencies is now available for adoption. We can only destroy public records with the consent of the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. If we don't adopt the schedule, we are obligated to obtain approval for each and every document that we destroy, no matter how insignificant. So, no. The new schedule requires each local government to define what the reference value, when the reference value ends for many types of records. There's plenty of guidance available that provides information about records retention and public law, including training opportunities and tips for maintaining records. I would recommend that the board approve the schedule and then allow the staff to establish and enforce the internal policies setting the minimum retention periods for the records.
I make a motion that we approve that.
Second?
Any discussion?
As I read this, Heather, there are certain points where there is a discretionary period that the town can define, correct?
Correct.
Could I just ask that once those are done, that you just inform the commissioners what they are?
That would be no problem.
I know you'll use different guidance, and there's a way to agree upon it, but that way we would know.
No problem at all.
So can we have a motion where we accept that the staff will do this and it will be communicated to the board what has been decided for the discretionary values?
So we had a motion, I need to
Joe,
withdraw
I
it.
think who made the
We had a
original
motion
motion?
already.
Yeah, I know,
So I
that's
had to
why.
withdraw it.
Right.
So I withdraw the original motion.
No.
Who
You
made the
withdraw it.
second?
I withdraw it.
All right,
Okay.
so
So it's drawn.
motion
New
made.
motion.
So,
Drawn.
motion that we have the staff to develop the new schedule, including the discretionary time periods, and inform the board of what those discretionary time periods are when they've been decided.
I second that.
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. It's unanimous, Madam Clerk. Number 17, Town Manager's Report.
Yes, sir. As required by the Local Government Budget and Fiscal Control Act, I am obligated to tell you that we've moved approximately $15,000 from our vinyl fence account in the sewer fund over to the operations account in order to procure the Vector sled that we've talked about previously. In the lift station 4 upgrade, we were going to incur a cost of approximately $13,000. We're going to, we would have to have that same cost for the second phase of it, and we were able to just go ahead and buy the asset for less than 2 cycles of lease, and we're assuming that we can use that asset in an emergency interim occasion also. So that asset is here, and should we need it, we can use it, and it's also a bottom line savings to the lift station programmed upgrade. And so it just dawned on me, I'm assuming we're going to do lift station 3 and lift station 2, but anyway, we've gone ahead and done that. Looks like we've been really hard at it with FEMA and the hurricanes. We've still got the $335,000 out with Matthew. Haven't heard back on that unless you got something today. Florence, our approximately $100,000 for debris and protective measures have been quantified, and I am of the impression that those have been approved. We will be bringing a budget amendment to you next month in order to recognize those funds, because heretofore, that's basically my overtime and my debris removal. We've been taking that money out of Hyde, and so some of my overtime accounts are blown because of that. So we've got to inject those funds back in it by budget amendment. Our utilities reimbursements are still a work in progress. One would believe that Holden Beach has got the only vacuum sewer system in the world, because when folks are trying, or the feds are trying to understand just what goes on in conducting the recovery operations of a sewer fund, we're speaking a whole different language. So we've just got some back and forth. The draft's been submitted, but we're going to have to requalify some of those expenses. And of course, our engineered beach damages have finally been quantified, submitted for evaluation on Florence. That number for our engineered beach is in excess of 700,000 cubic yards. Engineer's estimate of mitigating that damage is in the $17 million range. That's just for Florence, okay? The Hurricane Michael, our reimbursable eligible sand losses are calculated at almost 400,000 cubic yards. We have not submitted that yet because we're not there within the process, but we are ready to submit that. Our beach technical advisor and our consulting engineer, we're working through the mechanics of logically executing one project for 2 events. You save on mobilization. However, administratively on the federal side, we're working to understand how that will work on a reimbursement basis. Feds are driving the train on this one. We struggled mightily in the past to be able to cope with working a couple of different hurricanes in with the Central Reach project. It's quite a bit different scale. These are 2 major hurricane projects. The other ones were smaller. So there's a lot of work involved with it. What we're ultimately believe we are dealing with is a project that's going to be in the mid $20 million range. And as evidenced by y'all's action tonight, we'll be able to go ahead and move forward with the fundamental requirement to update our Central Reach project permit by finding adequate sand source to replace potentially what is in the orders of magnitude about 1.2 million cubic yards. And was I understanding that the decals went out in the water bills?
Yes.
So
Yes.
you should have received your decals by now. And if you can't, we can sell you some more. Canal dredging, looks like we're about 90% complete on that canal dredging project. I think we got about 2 to 3 canals left in Harbor Acres. That project, we're getting down in the short rows. The permit expires on the 31st. We believe that we are on target. It's going to be tight, but we believe that we're going to be able to shoehorn that that extra work in on there. I know there's a lot of folks that might have had their docks dinged a bit, and we're going to take care of making sure that we get all the sediment removed from the canals, and the plan is to remedy those fixes all at once at the end. So he's been fixing some of them as they've had time, but now that we're down, it's getting kind of tight. We're going to make sure that we have all the dredging operations finished before we start doing any of the cosmetic type fixes. Upcoming events, got a budget workshop on Thursday at 10 o'clock. Would be great to see this many people at the budget workshops. Woefully small numbers historically, but at least you guys have heard it tonight. And there is a series of workshops. The next one is on the 28th of March, and I believe there are 4 or 5 total, 2 or 3 more after the one on the 28th, in addition to the required public hearing and consideration in a regular meeting for the board in June. Chief Lane's retirement dinner is Thursday, close of business. If you haven't responded yet, I think we have a few more open slots. Please feel free to join us for a hail and farewell to the chief. Jeremy Dixon's swearing in follows as the new chief of police on the 1st of April at 10 a.m. And like to remind everybody, for all of our volunteers that help us so much throughout the year, that there's a volunteer luncheon on the 11th of April at noon, and please respond with reservations by the 4th of April so we can make sure we have enough food. And that's all I have for tonight.
The mayor's report's very brief. We appreciate your being here. And Mr. Fletcher?
I thank you for being here also, but if you are religious at all, I ask you to pray that Judy Brock is found safe and is returned to the family. I'd also ask you to be really careful that if you see something on television, or not on television, but in the media, the internet or something like that, a story, don't repeat it. Wait until you hear from our chief of police or from a formal representative that the facts are the facts. I've already read that she was found and she was returned and everything's fine, and it's not true as of now. So I would suggest you really, whatever you read or on the internet or something, just keep it to yourself and wait till we hear, because the mayor will maybe be told by the chief to do it, or the chief will do it, get the word out as to this thing, this mystery has been solved. But I ask you to pray that it is solved successfully. And thank you all for coming tonight. It's been a good night.
I would like to thank everyone for coming, and I'd like to point out that I appreciate all the people who commented prior to us voting on the suggested changes to the commercial property, because it makes life a little bit easier to get it right the first time around. So I hope we've all learned a little bit of a lesson when it comes to that, to, like measure twice, cut once. We should do that more often sitting here, too. So, thanks for coming.
Ms. Pat?
Thanks, everybody, for coming, and I echo the town manager's invitation to come to as many of the budget sessions as you can. There's 4 more. They get more and more interesting as we get more and more refined. So if you can't make this one, try to make at least one of the last 3.
Joe?
I'd also like to say, please keep the family of Judy in your thoughts and in your prayers. And a real special thanks to all of the volunteers, our police department. I know there's been a lot of guys in the fire department, too, that have been out there searching and looking as well. Thanks to them. And also thank you for attending this evening's meeting.
Mr. Freeman?
Yeah, I'd echo the thanks, and I know I saw a lot of activity with Jeremy and sheriffs, and I know they're working hard to have a good outcome for this incident.
Okay, it's now time for public comments on general items. Anything you want to speak to, if you raise your hand and be recognized, and go to the podium to my right, speak into the microphone so that you can be recorded, state your name and where you're from and so forth. First person I see is this lovely lady right here standing up. If you will, come tell us who you are, where you live.
My name is Dolly Mitchell, 132 Tarpon Drive. As I understand the rules of the commissioners, I cannot refer to anyone by name, but to the female commissioner, I will say thank you for at least starting the process on talking about trash. Over the last couple of years, we live 4 miles down the beach, and it has gotten considerably worse. And I do appreciate the efforts that have been made. I would like to point out that in the last couple of years, Helping Hands moved off of the island over across the bridge to help with congestion on Saturday morning. And there was a move to pick up trash at 6 o'clock on OVW to help the renters get off the island easier, to get the trash trucks out of the way. my perception has been that, people don't wanna put the trash cans that they're renting in these multi-thousand-dollar homes. They don't wanna get up early enough to move the trash can out. So they're leaving them there when they check out at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. As the new contract is issued, maybe the time needs to be delayed and let the renters deal with traffic. You know, we're having to deal with the trash they're leaving behind, or either do it, and I understand that the town has worked with the realtors getting more trash receptacles at the homes. But I sure hope we can take some steps forward and not move backwards.
Thank you, ma'am. Who else? Yes, sir, Mr. Williams.
My name is Ryan Williams, former resident of Holden Beach. I actually moved into the big town supply across the bridge, but I came forward there, I guess Kane and I did about 2 years ago, and we talked about dredging the inlet and several other topics. And I was aware of the bridge and the issues with boat ramps and stuff like everybody else. And I saw, well, Kane brought it to my attention about, them shutting the boat ramp down. And it's been kind of on my list of things that's been talked about for years and years, the prospect of us actually getting a new boat ramp. So in the process of calling the Wildlife Resource Commission, a lot of phone calls in the past weeks, the short end of the stick was, it hasn't been brought up with the Wildlife Resource Commission of our need for a boat ramp. So through several phone calls, it goes through several steps, but the first step is basically, is the use and demand for the ramp there? There's no way to get an accurate number right now because of the season and with what's going on currently. But I will say this, it didn't take but about 2 days before it was sent on from there to the engineering side. And they were actually looking at the logistics of where to put a boat ramp here in this area. So the numbers are yet to be done. The state hasn't come out and actually said, yes, you're getting the boat ramp. But they're not gonna send it on to the next step if they're not entertaining this thought. So there's 240 some ramps in North Carolina. I'm not sure the exact number of how many ramps where they have 2 in the same area, but I don't think that they're gonna entertain the thought from a private citizen to send it to the engineering department and say, yeah, we need to start looking at a boat ramp if they didn't think that it was justifiable. Our current boat ramp has 8 spots. So, the reasoning behind it, I'm gonna kind of head off some questions which I had with them to kind of get everybody up to par, but, I asked what was the process of us actually getting a ramp, and basically it's, the county or local town, municipalities, however it comes to be agreed upon, they purchase the property, and then the state puts the boat ramp in and maintains it for life. I'm not sure how many county properties are like that, but that's, to me, pretty good deal as far as not the upkeep and the maintenance in the long term, for what you're getting. So, it boils down to a business standpoint. I mean, that's all it is. I mean, is what you're spending and what the county's spending and whatever, and matching it with the state, justifiable for what you're getting. And so I know what's gonna happen, basically, there's not enough room on the island for a ramp. That's just, it's already been combed over, and it's just not, physically possible. There has been some ideas on the mainland, but, that's all it is ideas. So what I'm asking is, I'd like for the town to formally ask the county for help in acquiring a boat ramp in this area. And the state has actually reached out to the county. The county sent the site for the park over there, which will not work. It's basically too far through the marsh, and it's too far to deep water access. So they haven't come up with anything yet, but the county is not really working with the state as far as getting back with it. And so the state's not gonna knock down our door and give us a ramp, and I know what the county's gonna say. They're gonna say, It benefits the town of Holden Beach, the town of Holden Beach pay for it, the town of Holden Beach is gonna say, we've got a ramp, it's going into county, it should be the county's, person. So I understand it's tit for tat, and I know the first statement's gonna be is, we don't have money, we're on a budget and it's tight.
I got a point of order here. Do you wish to extend his time, commissioners?
If I
Yes.
can for the board, this captain is a captain, and he's representing a number of people at the meeting, so we might consider giving him an extended time, because he's speaking for, how many other captains do you have in the back? 5 or 6 other captains? We can do that?
Yes.
Yeah, I promise I'll try to sum it up as quick as I can. But, the gist of it is this, it's not written in stone in paper, but the state is seriously considering the option of having a ramp here in this area, where we already, have one. And so, it needs to be looked at as upon the town as, don't throw it off on the county and say, yep, we need to get a boat ramp and leave it be. They really needs to be a hard push from Holden Beach with the county and actually say, we want a boat ramp, what can we do to work together? And, I know the budget's coming up here, they're trying to do some stuff. I think it's actually June 3rd or something has to be turned in by, but somebody really needs to step up from the town and actually go forth to the county and say, listen, we need to figure out what we can do and go ahead and start putting funds away for the prospect of having a boat ramp in the future. But if something's not done now, more development that comes through time, it's just gonna get more difficult, and it's gonna get to a point where it's not gonna happen. That's just point blank fact. And, space gets smaller and smaller, and a boat ramp takes up quite a bit of space. So, you drive through these little towns out there in the middle of nowhere where they used to have a bottling plant or a factory or whatever you want, and that factory dried up. I mean, that ocean out there is our factory. So, if you're spending money there at the inlet and pumping sand there, and you have no access to get to it, it's almost pointless. So, I realize that not everybody uses that boat ramp, but the use of the ramp in general, what it provides to the public, as far as those people coming back, and, it just domino effects all the way down through there. So, that's basically the request of it, is just kind of pick up from where, it was left off, and just see what, the push with the town and county to see what we can make happen.
So are you engaging other towns, like the town of Supply, if it's gonna be on the mainland side?
I'm not aware of their town hall.
In Shallow.
But, it's gonna be in the county. That's just, logistically, there's just no spot available. So, that's all in the details, and that's, something that, will have to be worked out in the end. But, the fact is there is a desperate need for a boat ramp in this area. It takes pressure off the boat ramp on this side, and so, I think it gets hung up in the details in the end, when really and truly, the first step is just, it will work out, all you have to do is just want the ramp. That's it.
Thank you very
Good,
much.
thank you.
Thank the rest of you for being here. I got my captain's license over 30 years ago, and I certainly appreciate what you said. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
This is good news. I moved here 3 years ago and live in Old Ferry Connection, about a half mile from the Intercoastal Waterway, and exercise on the island 5 to 6 times a week by walking, using the basketball courts, and just say, it's a nice island, feel safe, it's a pretty island, and see the police patrolling around, and just want to say thanks and thumbs up, good job, and enjoy the area.
Thank you very, very much. That's welcome news. Anyone else want to say anything about anything tonight? If not, the chair is going to entertain a motion, if there is one made, to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Fletcher and Joe second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.